So I'm just gonna make a square composition. 1920 1080 at 30 frames. And I just made this like 10 seconds long. Doesn't need to be very long, but that should do the trick for us. So I'm just going to go over the basics of 3D camera and working in 3D space. There's later in the semester I'm going to actually take a class or two and look at Cinema 4D, which After Effects comes with Cinema 4D Lite, so a little bit of playing in 3D. And it integrates with After Effects really nicely. So, but we'll take a look at that later in the semester. For what I want to focus on right now is working with 3D elements and basic 3D elements in the regular timeline. So before I pull in some of my other assets, I'm just going to grab an ellipse, and I just kind of want to do a couple of example things. But there, I'll right click on it, transform, center my anchor point, and position it right about there. And then among the myriad of things we can add to our animation timeline, if I right click down here and go to new, camera is one of the options. So I'll grab that and you get this dialog. I've never had a reason to use it this way, but the 3D camera within After Effects has settings in it to basically emulate most real-world cinematography cameras. So if you know the details of your camera and you're trying to do a match move on an animated object to a particular scene, if you know all the settings of a particular camera, you can set those. There's more settings here than we're going to really even want to mess with, but the one thing I do want to put, straight out of the box, the defaults work pretty well, but the one thing I will point out is there's this type up here for 2-node as well as 1-node camera. The difference between a 2-node camera and a 1-node camera is that a 1-node camera is just the camera itself. Wherever the camera's pointing, that's what it's looking at. A 2-node camera, though, actually has a target that the camera's looking at. And if you move the target, the camera moves with it, and I'll show you here in a minute. But if you also move your camera, it'll move, but it'll stay tracked on the target. So that's the difference between the two. I'm just going to set up a 1-node camera here, though, because I just want to do some basic stuff. So let's do 1-node to start with, and I'll just call this my my basic main camera. All of these settings are also available within the timeline. So there's a couple of them that will change when we get there. But I'll just set it, I gave it a name, say OK, and yes. All right, and by default, it doesn't really do a whole lot of anything because you've got to have 3D elements within your scene to work on. You can change any asset in After Effects into a 3D element just by going over here to down here in your animation timeline with all your switches enabled. Remember, we got toggle switches and modes. With the switches enabled, the very last one looks like this little tiny cube. And if I click on the shape layer, come over here, and I'm just going to click on the cube, now it becomes a 3D object, and we can manipulate this in 3D space. So you notice that the widget on it changed as well. At the angle that I'm at, it's kind of tough to tell what's going on, but it's got its X, its Y, and its Z axes. So you've got 3 axes to work with now as opposed to only the 2, the X and the Y, that you had before. So if I'm just going to give myself some more room to work here. This will now be treated as a 3D kind of an object, which you'll see in a moment what kind of fun things we can do with that. But I'm also going to add a solid here real quick just to give a background. And that'll work. If I leave this solid as a 2D object, what I see, it's going to fill the screen all the time. So I'm going to leave this alone. I can mix 2D and 3D objects within the virtual camera. So I'm just going to lock that background so it doesn't really move around. And if you notice too, our composition area changed a little bit. So we now have this set of options over here in the lower right. So I'm going to leave everything set the way it is for the most part. Classic 3D is the renderer. There's Classic, there's Advanced, and there's a Cinema 4D renderer. We'll just stick with Classic. And right now the view is the active camera view. But I can change that and look at this from a variety of different ways. So if I choose top, my viewport changes. I can see my camera now. And actually my shape layer is right here. But that doesn't do me a whole lot of good. So I'm going to leave this set to active camera. And then this drop down out here right to the right of it is the view dialog. And I can look at it in 1, 2, 3, or 4 views. So right now it's in 1. If I go to 4 views, I get my active camera, and it looks like a front view, a top view, and a right side view, right or left. Right. So right, there's type right in the corner of the view. I find looking at 4 views in After Effects to be a little bit clunky. 4 views is kind of the default way to look at things in a 3D program, but I feel like there's so much going on in After Effects that it's not optimized very well. So I always just use the 2 views, keep one as my active camera view, and then the other one here, I'm just going to use top view for now. And I can switch this back and forth. If I've got this window selected, which I can tell by the blue corners on it, I can change this from top to front, back, left, right, whatever I want to. So I'm going to leave it at top though, because everything I do here is going to be more obvious. So here's my camera. It's trained right on the center of my space. So within my active view, the framed area is absolutely, that's my viewable area. But if I'm looking at the top, left, and right, this isn't the only space I have to work with. I can pull objects out into the gray area or back here past the camera, wherever I need it to go. It just, by default, it gives the composition size as a transparent artboard. If I change that from, with this window selected, if I change from classic, let's see, to draft 3D, I can see more area, but it's still kind of clunky, so I'll switch this back to, that'll remove the grid. And I'll switch this back to being framed out. Actually, I don't like that at all. Let's go turn that off. All right. So that's my space to work with anyway. So if I go ahead and grab this shape layer that I've got, zoom in here, I can see, so I can move it, left to right, up and down, and then in and out, but I can't really get to that very well. I can, but if I grab that widget and pull it, it's kind of pulling it towards me. I find it easier to do the Z depth. If I'm working in the top view, I can just grab this arm, and this is kind of the control that the 3D camera gives us, is now we got real space-based stuff going on. This is the cone of view of the camera, this triangle. And if I pull my object so that it goes outside of that, that's when it leaves the viewport frame. And that's where it sort of gets cut off. So I can, zoom out on this, and I can really move this back as far as I need to, or pull it way out here past my camera if I need to, whatever I want to do. But I've got those, that third dimension to work with now. Really, this is nicer from the standpoint of, if you wanted to do something sort of fake things going back into space, we would just scale it before and kind of maybe knock the opacity back a little bit. But this will actually not only move it for us and scale it, but based upon where the camera sits, you notice that the way it moves is quite a bit different as well. So I'm just going to leave that right there on the cone of the camera. So, like I said, this is a view cone. This line right here is the focal plane, and by default, everything is always in focus. But like a true camera, we can make adjustments to it to get depth of field and some things like that. So I'm just going to duplicate this circle. Select that there, duplicate it, and I'm going to pull him to this side. And then go into my camera here, select that. Oh, and I can just the same way that I can move around the objects, I could move around my camera if I wanted to. Fly my camera between them and past them. But for what we're going to do here, I think we're just going to kind of leave the camera in position for now and work with the shapes. So I'm going to open up this camera though. I've got regular transforms and camera options. And then I've got all of these different setting options for the camera. The only one I'm going to worry about, because I want to introduce depth of field, is the aperture, because the aperture on a camera is what controls your depth of field. So I'm just gonna, and I'm gonna leave the focal distance and everything else alone. Leave depth of field turned on, but right now the aperture is set to like 10.1 pixels. I'm just gonna click on that and drag and run it way up to like 1500 pixels or something like that, kind of high. As long as my objects stay right there on that focal plane, they stay in focus. But if I grab this one and I push it back in space, it starts to get blurry, and that depth of field comes into play. So go back way beyond my depth of my focal plane and it gets blurry. Come up in front of it too, up near closer to the camera, and it gets blurry as well. So we can kind of control our depth of field that way a little bit. So when we bring objects in, we can bring them in and land them into place where we want them to be in focus. So we can, apply blur that way. The only other item that might be worthwhile looking at right now is probably the iris shape. And right now the blur is based on this fast rectangle. And you've got all these different shapes for your aperture. Most apertures are a hex or a pentagon. But if I switch this, you notice that the blur on that shape changed a little bit. If I go back to fast rectangle, it's there. If I go to pentagon, it kind of sharpens it up just a little bit. And you can kind of try the different ones to see what they do, but mostly getting off that fast rectangle will kind of give you a little better looking blur. Maybe triangle. So leave that there. Select that object again. And I can push that way back as far as I want to, and it gets nice and blurry. So, like I said, we can mix 2D elements and 3D elements. So if I got some things, moving around the scene, or I'm moving my camera through, I could also set some type that I leave as a 2D element, and it would stay in place within the workspace. The only items that will be affected by the 3D camera are the ones that have this 3D switch turned on. So like even my background, if I unlock that, if I turn that into a 3D object, I can now grab it, and its position is right there on that focal plane. If I push that back, it becomes just a rectangular shape that fills the workspace. If I make that a 3D object, then, and I still want it to be the background color, I've got to constantly adjust the scale on it as well. So, but it's just simpler to leave your background color as a 2D element. It doesn't matter where you move it, that'll turn it back. Any questions so far? No? All right. So, basically you add a 3D camera, you get access to different views, and you can move stuff in that Z space and get a little more of a camera-like movement to them. So when I add 3D objects to the scene, notice too that I get 3 new menu items up here in my tools. The first one is an orbit, the second one is a pan, and the third one's a dolly. So it'll dolly in and out towards, and basically these control the camera. So watching the camera down here, if I grab my orbit, which is actually 1 on my keyboard, if I press down 1, I can rotate around my scene. Up, down, you name it. If I use pan under, which is 2 on my keyboard, or shift 2 if you're on a PC, pan, just see the camera just moves side to side. The motions match the typical camera movement vocabulary that we know. So pan, and then the last one here, or 3 on the keyboard, is dolly, and that'll just slide the camera in and out. So if I want to, in sort of a dynamic way, animate just the camera, I can do that with these 3 new tools up here. But I'll put everything back to where I was. So dolly, pan, orbit, pan, and dolly. And you can animate that camera just like anything else. So if I wanted to, this was my scene, I could theoretically use these controls to, if I select my camera, set, what are the transforms for? Oops. Open that up. The transforms for that are position, orientation, and then X, Y, and Z rotation. So that's the other thing with the 3D camera that you get to on the animation timeline, is now instead of just the 2 dimensions to work with, we've got all 3. And the same thing goes for my shapes. If I select that, open my transforms, like my scale, or rotate, maybe even better. I get all three settings that I can work with separately. So, all right. Let's see. I mean, those are kind of the basics of how to set that 3D camera up and get it started. And then, you can just move your objects around within the space and make them work for you. So I'm just going to turn off these two shapes. I don't want them. But I am going to go to, so I already created, just like I did the demo I did on Thursday. These had green screens behind them, or green backgrounds behind them. And I'm just going to drag the T and the R into my space, scale, just sort of scale them down. Do that, do that. And I'm just going to position these the way I actually might want them. So W will give me my rotate. We'll kind of do this. V to move them. All right. So these are still 2D objects. I still got a 3D camera, so I'll just go ahead and turn on the switches for those. Okay, they're both 3D objects now. And if I just grab the T and the R, I'll just grab them both. And I want to start them out back here beyond the camera. Actually, let's do this. Let's leave them there. That's where they're going to float into or fly into. So I'll just set position keyframes for each one of those at 2 seconds. So then if I come back here to about 15, I'll just do these each individually. So I'm just going to pull doing things. All right. Let's grab the R and we'll pull him. I'm just going to pull him out here past the camera and a little wide. And then I'll do the same thing with the T. But I'm going to actually, I want the T to land first, so I'm going to move this last keyframe. And I want to ease into those points. Ease. So now, in a very simplistic kind of a way, I'm kind of just floating those in there and they land, wherever they belong. It's kind of slow, it's kind of boring, so let's do that. Maybe the R will actually have everything hit later on. Try that. It's a little better. But we introduced that depth of field that way without having to get kind of crazy with adding blur modifiers and all of that kind of stuff. So it's something that you can try. What we can also do with the 3D camera is I want to actually I'm going to change my solid or my background back to a 3D object. And then Along with the 3D camera, we've also got, let's do this. So along with the 3D camera, we've got 3D lights as well. So if I right click here, go new camera, there's a light object right up here above it. I'll just grab it. And again, the settings that I get initially, I can also change down here. But I'm just gonna make it I'm just gonna leave it as a point light. And I'll leave all of its settings alone. Take the defaults. When I add a light source, here it is, but it starts to add, it adds shadows and vignetted corners into the scene. I'm just going to kind of pull this, maybe we'll leave it. Let's go from top view to front view. Pull this up a little bit, something like that. I can change the radius on this, change the brightness of it overall. There's other things I can do, but I just kind of want to. But I'm getting a whole different quality now into this animation, right? It's kind of given drastically different looks. The light will also cast shadows, but only if I'm going to just open up the R. Again, it's another feature of the 3D camera. Along with, with this composition, there's also a material options category here at the bottom. If I open it up, I've got settings for the material that the paper material. So I'm just going to turn cast shadows on. And if I'm not getting, let's see, light X, let's see, accept shadows on. I wonder if my solid isn't right. Oh, I was looking at the wrong item. So now I've got shadows when that drops into place. I pull that back and I close it up, go into my T, cast shadows on. Now when I play this through, I'm getting some slightly, it's just a whole different quality, right? I mean, it's really pretty cool. So I'm just going to actually move I want a little bit of that shadow underneath. So grab my background, switch this back to, from front to top. And background, slide it back just a little bit. Maybe I just need to zoom in. Maybe my aim's terrible. There we go. So if I slide this back just a little bit, do I have snapping on? I do. Let's turn that off. I can scale that background object up to fill. So I'm getting some different kinds of things. It's, needs refinement. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. So I'm just going to open my speed. Let's grab this one. So gives us some neat kinds of effects. I can control the darkness of the darkness of the shadow and a lot of that kind of stuff. I can put more than one light in a scene. I mean, I've got the 1-point light in there, but if I add another light, I could make this, instead of a point light, I could make it a ambient light, which ambient light, is just that sort of overall glow that a room kind of has from all the light bouncing around it. Maybe I make my ambient light a little blue or something. Ooh, that was a bit much. Open that up. Its intensity is way too high. So I can dial the intensity of that down. But that'll kind of fill in shadows a little bit too and give me a little bit of a slightly different look. So those could be any shape really. I just kind of tried to make them apply to what we're doing. So, but it's cool to play around with. You get some kind of neat effects. And then toss into that, maybe we toss into that some different effects, like on the paper, maybe we put a page flip into that. So I can sort of let this fall in, maybe that R hits and it all sits there, but on the R, go over to my effects and maybe grab a page flip and kind of make it flip up and blow away when I'm done. Something to that effect. Could be kind of neat. So if I CC page turn, drop that on there, it'll actually kind of flip up that corner. And there's increase the fold radius, and I can light direction. Let's see, the light direction needs to be sort of match my spotlight. And the fold position. So where is, I should probably go back to one view for this. So I can use that page turn to kind of flip that up. And the image on the front shows through in the back, but I can change that as well. But that's all animatable. This isn't really, I mean, the page flip is just one of the 2D effects, but it still works out rather nicely with that. So, we could combine different things. So that's those are the basics of the 3D camera. So the only other thing I want to kind of show you real fast is, and like I said, you can put a 3D camera in, just leave the 3D camera in place right where it's at, lock it down, then you can kind of work with your composition the way you normally would. It's just that you've got those extra dimensions to work with on the elements themselves. So new composition real quick. Should do the same thing. Let's grab that solid, drop it in here, grab a circle. We'll just leave it right there. And right click new, let's add a camera. This time though, I'm going to grab the 2-node camera instead of the 1-node that I used before. So 2-node camera, say okay. And when we go and look at our 2 views now, you'll see the difference is that, well, you can kind of see it. Right here, there's a target that the camera's attached to. If I click on that target and pull it out a little bit, you see the camera will follow the target whenever I animate it. So nothing's moving because I did not yet turn that into a 3D shape. There we go. Now when I grab my camera, where did my target go? There's my target. Now when I move that, I can kind of pan across the scene with it that way. And I can just animate the position of that target point. It's really just an anchor point, but animate the camera that way, or when with the target right where it generally lives, if I go up here and I use my orbit or pan or any of those, I kind of rotate around that center point whenever I move the camera, because it's always trained to that point. And when you're doing that, it's kind of easy to lose track of where you're at or what you're doing. But if you always look at this little widget that's in the corner, as long as the green arrow is pointing up, you're looking at it in roughly the right direction. So if you ever get it flipped over to the point that it's like that, you're like directly below it. So that kind of helps you tell where you're at. So the 2-node camera has its uses. I mean, you can work with, but it is really kind of and if I come over here to the front view, it doesn't do anything. So the orbit, pan, and dolly only work in the active camera view to pan around the object. So undo all that since I messed it all up. But yeah, so that's the 3D camera. I mean, the basics of the 3D camera. After Effects 3D tools also give you the ability, like I said, Cinema 4D comes bundled with it. And just to show you, I can show you real quick, but we'll spend another class on this later. But if I go to this composition, oh no, that's not the one. Comp 2. This is actually a 3D, Cinema 4D 3D model embedded in After Effects. The animations are done in After Effects, or in Cinema 4D. And they'll play through into After Effects. This is one of those ones that gets kind of slow. Let's try that again. 3D modeling and 3D objects, I think, are a lot of fun. I get a lot of opportunity to do that, so. But it's just very slow to screen draw. But once it goes all the, draws all the way through, I'll just stop that there. So now if I play it through, it's a little faster. But, so that's kind of a neat feature that we'll look at down the road. Yeah, so, oh, remember on Thursday too, I showed, scanning objects and trying to, sort of move it along with the light bar. We kind of looked at that on the scanner. Again, all part of this analog type exercise. If we look at, I don't actually have the scans I did here. I have ones I did at home, which my scanner at home doesn't do quite as nice a job, or quite as good a job, but that's how those sequenced images can look. It just gives you a very stop motion kind of a look. So with our animated type, we're really just kind of looking for some fun animations. I mean, they don't have to be overly complicated. I would probably actually combine some of my textures from my texture library with this. Any number of things I can do with it. I mean, if I've got that, I can do pretty much anything else. So I can make a, new composition from the selection. I can add a new adjustment layer. Add the metric color to it. And give it a darker vignette on the edges. Any number of other things I can, build off of that to make it a kind of a fun animation. So with your analog type exercises, that's the kind of thing we're really, you've done your mind map, you've picked your 5 words. I just want you to animate those. And it's like I said, it's supposed to be 1 a day for 5 days. Yours are due on Tuesday. So if you want to do 1 a day for 5 days, go for it, but all 5 need to be done on Tuesday. All right? So, and really the idea here is that, I mean, you're not spending, 3 to 4 hours on, 4 hours on a text animation. Do, plan them out ahead and just do some simple kinds of things. I think these are supposed to be just 5 seconds a piece, so it's not very long, It's enough time to kind of bring them in and make them loop, if you can. That's a plus as well. Try to make them loop. All right? If you want to try to use a 3D camera with it, that's cool. But I at least wanted to show it to you so you had it as an option as you're working through these. So they don't have to be crazy. You don't have to don't feel like you have to use a 3D camera on it or anything else. So I just want to make sure you had all the different or more options available to you with it. All right? Any questions? Okay. So I kept that short.